Okay, picture this. 11 tiny ships.
Hmm.
They're just lost in what someone called the huge vacancy of sea. It's 1788, New Year's Day, actually, 44 degrees south latitude. And they're celebrating, if you can call it that, with hard salt beef and a few musty pancakes.
Ah.
These are the ships of the First Fleet, battling gales, trying to get around Van Diemen's Land, carrying Britain's refuse toward a destination that sounds almost mythical. It's so far away.
That image really sets the scene, doesn't it? It captures the sheer scale of what we're diving into today. We're looking at sources about the founding of New South Wales, the ultimate penal colony, the place that became modern Australia. It's this incredible, chaotic story.
Right. And our mission here is to unpack that. How did this mix of 18th century British crime, naval strategy, and just pure logistical guts lead to a new nation?
And we want to see it through the eyes of the people who lived it, from Governor Phillip right down to kids who'd been sentenced to death.
So let's unpack this. What was life really like in a society built essentially by its outcasts? What drove this whole thing? Why send people halfway across the globe?
Well, the simple answer is the system back home in Britain just collapsed. It broke down completely. After the American Revolution, you see, the colonies there just stopped taking Britain's convicts, wouldn't accept them anymore.
I read one quote, a colonist complaining America had become the common sewer and dung yard to Britain.
Exactly. And when that outlet was closed off, British prisons just became dangerously overcrowded, almost immediately.
And feeding into that overcrowding was the infamous Bloody Code, which sounds terrible, but it was actually kind of inconsistent, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. It was chaos. Our sources mention, 187 laws between 1660 and 1819 that mandated the death penalty.
Aye.
And the list of things you could be transported for, it's this exotic catalog.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, being a Quaker and refusing to take an oath, that could get you transported. Stealing linen that was laid out to be bleached or printed. Specific groups even, like moss troopers from the Scottish border.
Moss troopers. So hyper-specific, almost bizarre laws. But then there's this contradiction, right? Alongside this severity, there was leniency.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part. Juries often just subverted the law. They knew it was too harsh, so they deliberately downgrade the value of stolen goods in their verdict. Say something was worth less than a shilling, even if it clearly wasn't, just to avoid a mandatory hanging.
So the people enforcing the law knew it was broken.
Pretty much. But while some found mercy, others found, profit. The prisons, the jails, they were often run like private businesses, like franchises. The keeper of Newgate Prison, a guy named Richard Ackerman, reportedly left a fortune, £20,000. It just shows the corruption baked into the system.
And before this massive journey, where did all these prisoners go? You mentioned overcrowding.
They ended up in these holding pens, either crammed into existing jails, which were riddled with disease, or onto these floating prisons called hulks.
Ah, yes. Hull.
Detested things, usually old warships, just moored in rivers like the Thames. Awful conditions, cramped, disease-ridden. They were supposed to be temporary, just until transportation could resume properly, but they became these notorious eyesores. And they actually stuck around until 1853.
So Britain desperately needed a new place. But why New South Wales? Why somewhere so incredibly, preposterously distant, as one source puts it? Weren't there closer options, like West Africa?
They did look at the Gambia River, yeah, but it was seen as too risky. Disease was a major concern, plus the possibility of another European power maybe grabbing the territory. New South Wales, on the other hand, its distance was the advantage. It was the perfect oubliette.
Oubliette, French term.
Yeah, it means a dungeon where the only way in or out is through the ceiling. Basically a place you drop someone into and just forget about them. Out of sight, out of mind for British society.
And the man picked to lead this forgetting process, this massive undertaking, was Captain Arthur Phillip.
Right. An interesting figure, described as sort of obscurely gifted, reserved. A naval officer anxious for work who suddenly finds himself Commodore of 11 ships, governor of a vast territory, and jailer-in-chief.
That's an incredible range of jobs for one person, naval strategist and head jailer.
Absolutely. And that duality shows up right away in the planning. Choosing New South Wales wasn't just about dumping convicts. There was a clear strategic motive. The main planning document, the heads of a plan, really focuses on resources. Specifically, New Zealand flax for ropes and sails, and the tall timber on Norfolk Island for ship masts.
So strategic commodities, crucial for the Navy.
Exactly. For a major sea power like Britain, securing those was a big deal. The convicts, in a way, were the necessary means to establish that resource base.
Human ballast for a resource mission. Grim. So what was that 8-month voyage actually like for the convicts?
Oh, horrific, truly. The sources paint a bleak picture. Once they were loaded, each person had a space about 18 inches wide by 6 feet long. That's it.
18 inches.
18 inches, often in chains. The headroom was so low, the air so bad down there. Apparently a candle often wouldn't even stay lit on the prison decks. Just not enough oxygen.
Unimaginable. How did they even try to manage disease in those conditions?
The ship's surgeon, John White, was very proactive, thankfully. He ordered constant cleaning, used quicklime as a disinfectant, and even exploded small amounts of gunpowder between decks.
Exploded gunpowder.
Yeah, to try and fumigate the air, disperse the vapors. It sounds drastic, but they were terrified of epidemics wiping everyone out.
And this wasn't just hardened criminals. There were children involved, too.
Tragically, yes.
Yeah.
The story of John Hudson is just staggering. He was convicted of breaking and entering in 1783. He was 9 years old. 9. Sentenced to death initially. Put on a transport ship bound for America, which wasn't even British anymore. There was a mutiny. He somehow survived that. Then he avoided hanging, basically on a technicality. Spent the next 3 years on the hulks. And then he ends up on Phillip's first fleet, sailing to New South Wales, a child who'd already been through hell.
A 9-year-old surviving mutiny, the Hulks. It's hard to grasp the level of just casual brutality. And these convicts, they weren't just individuals. They had their own culture, didn't they? A specific language.
They did, yes. The flash language, or cant. It was the criminal underworld slang, their own coded way of talking. It was so distinct that courts often needed interpreters. You had words like beak for a magistrate, pig for a police runner, tickling the Peter for cracking a safe.
Tickling the Peter. Okay.
Right. It was this shared language, this argot. Some sources even mention a kind of shared mythology, devotion to a criminal figure called the Tawny Prince. It really marked them as a separate group, an underclass.
So after this incredibly long and harsh journey, they finally arrive. Phillip chooses Port Jackson over Botany Bay, right? Calls it Sydney Cove.
Correct. He found Botany Bay too exposed, too shallow. Port Jackson he immediately recognized as the finest harbor in the world. He named the settlement Sydney Cove after Lord Sydney, the Home Secretary back in London.
And his instructions regarding the local indigenous people, the Eora.
His orders were quite clear. Conciliate their affections, build bridges, essentially. But the very first encounter set a different tone. The Eora gathered on the shore, saw these ships, these strange people landing, and they yelled out, "Where? Where?" And the sources are pretty direct. "Get out! Go away! Be gone!" Not exactly a welcome mat.
A difficult start to conciliation. How did that cultural clash play out?
It was immediate and deep. The Eora saw the Europeans almost like ghosts, with their pale skin and strange clothes, strange outer skins, as one account puts it, and there was just fundamental misunderstanding. Philip tried goodwill gestures, approaching unarmed, offering gifts, but the Eora were suspicious. There's this fascinating note about how the Eora were confused when British officers didn't react to certain situations or opportunities in ways the Eora expected. They concluded the Europeans had desires that were really hard to figure out, to considerable subtlety to discern. Just a total mismatch of cultural cues.
While they're trying to figure each other out, they also have to build a settlement from scratch. How did that go?
Not well initially. Many of the convicts were from cities like London. They had no idea about farming, felling trees, building things, and they weren't exactly motivated. Plus, the environment itself fought back. The Australian hardwood timber was incredibly tough, incorrigible, one source calls it. It resisted their tools, their axes and planes. Building even basic shelters was a struggle.
So, unwilling workers, uncooperative trees. What about the command structure? Was everyone pulling together?
Not at all. Philip faced real resistance from his own officers. The lieutenant governor, Major Robert Ross, was apparently quite difficult, prickly. And crucially, Ross and the other Marine officers refused to supervise the convict work parties. They felt it was beneath them, that they were soldiers, not overseers.
They wouldn't supervise the labor, so who did?
It created a huge problem for Philip, a leadership vacuum. He ended up having to rely on convicts he trusted, promoting them to overseer roles. People like Henry Cable, who we'll come back to. His own military officers just wouldn't do it.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If your military command is shirking duty, how do you keep order among hundreds of convicts in a hostile environment?
You resort to swift, public, and frankly terrifying justice. That's what happened. The first criminal court was set up almost immediately. 3 naval officers, 3 military officers. And they didn't waste time. A convict named Sam Barsby struck a drum major with a tool, a broken adze. He was sentenced to 150 lashes.
150 lashes with the cat o' nine tails. That was brutal, wasn't it?
Extremely. The cat o' nine tails often had knots in each strand, sometimes with lead weights embedded in them. The sheer terror of that whip was a key tool for maintaining control in those chaotic early days.
And signs of desperation, like hunger, appeared early too.
Very early.
Yeah.
Thomas Hill became the first person banished to that small island in the harbor, the one that got nicknamed Pinch Gut. His crime: stealing bread. It suggests rations were already scarce, or people were maybe gambling them away. Hunger was biting.
And then came something even worse than hunger or the lash.
Yeah.
Disease striking the indigenous population.
Yes, the smallpox epidemic, Galgala, the Eora called it. It was devastating for them. Estimates suggest maybe 2,000 Eora died around the Sydney area. The Europeans, having prior exposure, had some resistance. For the Eora, it was catastrophic. Phillip even discussed it with a visiting French expedition, trying to figure out the source, but it remained a mystery then. A terrible irony.
And relations between the settlers and the Eora deteriorated further.
They did. Tensions kept rising. Phillip himself was wounded. He got speared in the shoulder during an encounter and ambush at Sydney Cove. And that incident led him to order punitive expeditions against the local groups responsible, which in turn caused a major crisis of conscience within his own ranks.
How so?
Well, Lieutenant William Dawes, he was the colony's astronomer and surveyor. A man of science, he flat out refused the order. He said he abhorred the objectives hunting down natives. Phillip threatened him with a court-martial. It's a really pivotal moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Someone at the heart of the colonial project, questioning its methods, its morality, right near the beginning.
A voice of conscience early on. Meanwhile, the colony is still struggling to survive. Famine was a real threat.
A constant threat. Crops failed repeatedly in the unfamiliar soil and climate. Rations got cut again and again. It got so bad that Phillip, in a remarkable gesture, actually used his own private stash of flour, 300 pounds of it, to add to the public stores. He wanted, as one source notes, any complaining convict to see that want was not unfelt even at Government House. Trying to lead by example, sharing the hardship.
What else could he do, facing starvation?
His big move was incredibly bold. He dispatched the colony's main ship, the HMS Sirius, on a desperate emergency voyage all the way around the world via Cape Horn to Cape Town in South Africa just to buy grain. An unbelievable gamble, a most gallant undertaking, it was called. Sending their lifeline ship on such a perilous journey showed just how dire things were.
And it's against this backdrop of extreme hardship and risk that we see one of the most famous events, the escape of Mary Bryant.
Yes, Mary Broad, as she was then, and her husband Will Bryant, a Cornish fisherman and smuggler. An amazing story. In 1791, inspired apparently by Captain Bligh's famous open-boat voyage after the Bounty Mutiny, they stole the governor's cutter, along with their 2 young children and 7 other convicts. They navigated over 3,000 nautical miles in this small open boat, north along the coast, across the Arafura Sea, all the way to Kupang in Timor.
Incredible seamanship. How did they survive?
They managed to convince the Dutch governor there that they were survivors from a shipwreck. It was an astonishing feat of endurance and deception.
That level of determination is incredible. It really contrasts with the news coming from England, right?
Yeah.
The Second Fleet.
Oh, drastically. If the First Fleet's journey was harsh, but relatively well managed in terms of survival rates, Phillip took pride in that the Second Fleet in 1790 was an absolute disaster, a floating horror show, especially the ship Neptune. The death toll on that one ship was staggering. Somewhere between 150 and 170 prisoners died on the voyage.
What went wrong?
Greed, basically. Unlike the First Fleet, which was Navy-managed, the Second Fleet was run by private contractors, Camden, Calvert, and King. They were paid per head embarked, not per head landed, so their incentive was to cram people on board and spend as little as possible on keeping them alive. There was even a black market run by the crew.
A black market further.
For basic necessities. Selling an extra pint of water for 1 shilling and 6 pence, trading 3 moldy biscuits for a pair of shoes. Just pure exploitation compounding the misery. It was a national scandal when the survivors landed, looking like skeletons.
It completely undermines any idea that this was somehow a reformative or humane project by that point.
Absolutely. And the colony kept getting these waves of new arrivals, adding to the complexity, like the Irish convicts.
Ah, yes. What was different about them?
Many of them spoke Gaelic, not English. They had their own distinct culture, their own interpretations of Catholicism, sometimes seeing Christ as a fellow sufferer, someone oppressed like them. They bonded together, and they brought their own desperation. There's this almost unbelievable story from November 1791 about 20 Irish male convicts just set off from Parramatta into the bush.
Where were they going?
They were trying to walk to China.
Walk to China.
From Sydney.
Yes. They genuinely believed there was a large river somewhere inland that separated New South Wales from the back part of China, and they could follow it there. It shows how utterly lost and disconnected they felt, how little they understood the geography. They were eventually rounded up, so wounded by Aboriginal attacks, their hopes obviously crushed. Just layers upon layers of hardship and misunderstanding. But amidst all this chaos, were there any signs of, well, a functioning society emerging? Phillip's Commonwealth.
Slowly, yes. Very slowly. There were crucial first steps. James Roos is a key figure here. He was a Cornish farmer, originally a convict on the hulks. Phillip gave him a small grant of land, 30 acres, on condition he prove he could support himself by farming it.
And could he?
He did. He became the colony's first successful independent farmer. It was a huge symbolic moment. It proved self-sufficiency was actually possible. It laid the groundwork for this idea of the yeoman farmer, the small landholder.
Okay, so agriculture starts to work. What about law and rights? Were convicts just chattel?
This is where it gets really interesting and where that unique Australian character starts to form. Remember Henry Cobble, the convict Phillip made an overseer?
Yes, the trustworthy one.
Well, Cobble and his wife had property stolen from them by a ship's captain on the voyage out. They sued him, a convict suing a ship's captain, and they won. It was the first civil lawsuit in the colony's history.
A convict won a civil case.
Yes. It was a landmark moment. It established this principle of equality of convicts before the law. It meant that, regardless of your background, your sentence, you had legal standing, you had rights that could be upheld in court. That was fundamental.
So a system built on authority, but also grudgingly incorporating equality.
Exactly. That's the tension Phillip was managing. And eventually, exhausted by the strain, suffering from chronic pain, possibly kidney stones, which was apparently common with the salty diet, he finally got permission to return to England. He left in December 1792.
What did he leave behind? What is the state of the colony then?
He left behind something precarious but viable, a foothold established through immense hardship, yes, but also through this sort of grudging cooperation.
Okay.
You mentioned the anti-scurvy sweet tea herb earlier.
Smilax classifilius.
Yes. Well, that knowledge, shared between convicts and guards, was vital. It was even found among Mary Bryant's escape supplies and noted in official papers. Shared desperation bred shared solutions. So Phillip left this system defined by that tension. Strict authority, necessary for control, but also this nascent equality before the law. And that combination allowed people like Cobble, and later Mary Reeby, she arrived as a teenage convict girl on the First Fleet and became one of the colony's most successful merchants. It allowed them to eventually prosper.
But there's always the other side of the coin, the cost, especially for the Eora people.
Immense. Utterly immense. Despite Phillip's initial instructions, his own attempts at conciliation, the cultural gap proved too wide, the impact of disease too devastating, and the conflict over land became inevitable. The Eora presence was often reduced in the European mindset to either being an obstacle, a threat, or a subject of scientific curiosity.
Which brings us to that final telling detail.
Right. When Phillip got back to England, Sir Joseph Banks, the famous botanist, president of the Royal Society, very influential, asked him for specimens from New South Wales. Scientific curiosity, the Enlightenment mind at work.
What kind of specimens?
Among other things, Banks asked for a head, an Aboriginal head, as a scientific specimen.
Good heavens.
And Phillip's reply is stark. He wrote back to Banks apologizing. "I am sorry," he said, "that I cannot send you a head." The reason? The Eora had burned the bodies of their relatives who died from the smallpox epidemic. Their own funeral practices, their own response to the devastation wrought by the newcomers, prevented Phillip from fulfilling this request from the heart of the scientific establishment.
Wow. That single exchange says so much, doesn't it?
It perfectly captures the deep, often horrifying disconnect. The Enlightenment curiosity driving the exploration and settlement on one side, and the brutal human reality and the profound cultural clash on the other. The desire to understand, colliding with the devastating consequences of arrival.
A head as a specimen. That really is something to mull over. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.